Thanks so much for coming. Well, we're excited to have you here. I'm going to get my screen up to share with you. If you are interested, I'm going to ask Pam if she could just put this up for me. In the chat, I've put a link to a Dropbox folder where you can find a copy of the slides that Trevor and I are using today. I've also put up copies I downloaded from the Brightspace shell, the description of the activities we use, and just different things, a rubric that I've used in previous iterations. I just thought, think of it as a loot bag for coming to our session today. I know all us teacher types like to walk away with tools, right, Trevor? So here we go. So I'd like to start off with
a loot bag.
And nothing better than a loot bag, right? I'd like to start off with the land acknowledgement. You know, I've used here on the slide the land acknowledgement that is commonly used when we're in virtual spaces, acknowledging, you know, that the territories of all memorials campuses are on the diverse lands of various indigenous groups, including the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of the province. But I think I want to extend that. It's really important because the land acknowledgement is one of the many things that in the last probably 3 or 4 years have really been instrumental in forcing me to think about where I'm situated within a system. I put a picture, this is the G.A. Hickman building for people at MUN. They would be familiar. This is the Faculty of Education is located in this building. And it always makes me chuckle when I walk in through the front. So my parents were born and raised on the island, part of the province, but I grew up in Toronto. So for Newfoundlanders, I'm sure you can relate to this. I'm the mainland cousin. And I would come here every summer, and I had one aunt who lived here in town, and all of the rest of my family lives in various communities on the other side of the overpass, as my grandfather says. And when I was a little girl, I remember driving by this building all the time because I thought it was so weird. Like we called it the Squiggly Building. And I think it's really interesting, you know, I never ever thought that I would come back in this capacity and work in the Squiggly Building, yet here I am. And I think about this a lot, returning to Newfoundland to live versus being a visitor in the space where my family is from has really created a space for me to think about what it means to be first generation in a university environment, what it means to grow up working class and transcend into another group, the history of Newfoundland settler peoples and the tension between the oppressor and the oppressed. I did go to school here a couple of years, 1982 and 1984. I lived in a nomadic construction worker family, so I've lived everywhere in Canada. But I do remember hearing in school that there was like there were no Beothuk. The Beothuk didn't exist anymore, and the part of the story that was missing was why, and not learning about that. So as I became an educator of educators, I've really started questioning, and certainly since becoming a mother. And those of you who are in sessions with me yesterday, you know, I identify we're a neurodiverse family. All of these things are pushing on me to situate myself, my own privilege, how I'm teaching, and you know the tension that exists in these spaces. So I tell you all of this just to say it's all of this is what's happening under the water that led to what Trevor and I are going to be talking about today. And I think that's really important. I welcome you all as learners. I'm a learner in this space. I know I can speak for Trevor. We learn together still. And please feel free to ask. Sorry, my phone apparently is connected to these headphones. But feel free to ask questions whenever. And Pam is going to moderate the chat for me. And if we miss anything, we'll come back. So here's where we're going to go. I thought, Trevor, you and I could introduce ourselves, talk about where we're teaching, who we teach, who our class is as a something we talk about a lot. I'm going to quickly skate through the activity of the critical reflection, what I call the Minds on ePortfolio. And then I'm going to let Trevor do most of the talking about it, because I think it's important that you hear his viewpoint. And then we'll just wrap up. I'll tell you what I'm doing right now as I get ready to do this again. And hopefully we can have most of our time for a conversation. So you know who I am. Just to give you a context, because I know this comes up everywhere, I teach predominantly in the graduate program. I'm in the leadership and policy group, which means my classes tend to be small. The class that I'm talking about here is always full, but full means 20 students. So that's a really important piece to keep in mind. However, I will say I have done something similar recently this year with my undergraduate students, but still, relatively speaking, a small class with 40 students. But that's my teaching context here at the university. And Trevor, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, folks. So my name is Trevor Taylor. My pronouns are he and him. And in addition to being the principal here at Folkwall Central Academy, I'm also the president of the NLTA Special Interest Council for Gender and Sexual Diversity, which myself and a colleague of mine actually founded, and it came to be a few years ago. Also director of Folkwall and Pride, which is something myself and my partner started 3 years ago out here on the island. Something we're very proud of. So in addition to being an educator and a learner, I do consider myself an advocate as well. I'm I'm partial to jumping on the radio, and they're partial to calling me. So it helps us. So you probably maybe even heard my voice before. But to give you a bit of context, this is 11 years in education, Newfoundland and Labrador for me. I actually grew up in CBS, a town just outside of St. John's, with roughly about 25,000 people, probably more now. So most of my experience as a student was really within the Newfoundland and Labrador school system, different districts at the time. But that was the first 20 years of my life. Oh, the sound is really choppy. Okay. All right, I'll see if I can, let me know if it gets any worse or better, and maybe I can switch over. I feel like an optometrist now. Better or worse? Oh, okay. All right. Okay, well, we could pause here. Actually, maybe break away from me for now. Maybe you'll come back to me and we'll see. I'll pick up my introduction from there. Joelle?
Sure. You want to jump out and then try to reconnect?
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're all familiar with this, right? This is what happens when we're dialing in from rural communities. So here's the context for my course. It's called a Seminar on School Improvement. It's a course that I typically recommend to students take in the second half of their a master's degree. Most of these students are current teachers in a public school system. My students come from Newfoundland and Labrador through to BC. It could be the Yukon, Northwest Territories, literally coast to coast to coast in Canada. Sometimes teachers from international and national independent or private schools, and sometimes also folks from post-secondary institutions, usually the College of the North Atlantic. I usually have one or two per round who are coming from me to me from there. What we're talking about, it's really a course about organizational change. So if I were in a faculty of business, we'd be talking about organizational behavior, organizational learning, those sorts of things. But it's geared to a K-12 school context. Although, because if I know I have students who are coming to me from the college or university context, then I adjust the course syllabus to throw some things in there, some studies that are context relevant for them. So moving on. Why did I choose critical reflection? So I had taught this course. I did all my graduate work at OISE University of Toronto, and I had taught a version of this course when I was sessional teaching there. And what I find sometimes when educators are coming into the course is it's basically a get it done kind of mode. They're coming in. They want to do the assignments, they want to, you know, do well, pass go, collect the $200, move on to the next thing to get their degree, because usually they're doing the master's degree to get the qualifications they need to move on into formal administrative positions. So most of the students who come to my class are folks who are teacher leaders within their own school, which means they're a department head or have some sort of named position of responsibility, or I believe Trevor was a brand new principal or was an aspiring principal at the time when he took the course with me. But these were the students that we had. And what, as somebody who studies knowledge mobilization and whose research agenda focuses on connecting research and practice, I was looking for a way to how I could get students to really start making those connections, because they weren't. They were reading what they needed to read, they were posting in the discussion whatever they needed to post, and we were sort of just going through the motion, so to speak. So I revisited my course design, and I had been doing some reading, just generally, you know, through some teaching, higher ed teaching blogs that I get about critical reflection. And I thought, oh, this might actually be a really good pathway for me to create a learning environment where I'm explicitly asking students to apply what they've read in the course readings to their own day-to-day practice. So that was sort of the rationale for the critical reflection. I wanted them to understand that education research has practical relevance. So one of the challenges that we experience in education is a lot of, it's not uncommon, if you've ever spent time in a faculty of education, for teacher candidates to come back from their internships, and even before then be like, I don't need to be here. I'm learning everything I need to know when I'm actually in the school. So when they come back to me, and I have them in the last term before they graduate, or sorry, I'm getting my groups mixed up. Even when they come back as graduate students, sometimes they come in with that same sort of attitude. Like it's like educational research sits over here, but we all know that that really has very limited um, influence on practice. So I was trying to create this space where we were making these stronger connections. So how could I do that? I fell into this idea of a learning journal, but how could I facilitate that in a meaningful way in an online space? So this is asynchronous online course, although I do build in optional synchronous components, but that's also important to say. So I had done some reading. Again, this came out of, I don't know why my slides aren't sharing. This also came out of, you know, just reading teaching blogs basically around ePortfolios. And in my research, I had spent lots of time in one school district in particular in Ontario, where they were focused on pedagogical documentation, which was, you know, how getting students to track their learning throughout a course. So I was in this thinking space, and I thought, well, ePortfolios would be really useful, because a lot of these folks would be going on to job interviews for principal positions, or leading. A lot of my students would lead professional learning opportunities for teachers in their own school, so they could use it as an example. That was what my thinking was. Whether or not they do or they don't, I know from hearing on the wire and maintaining connections with students that some do. But that was the idea, was that they would leave my class with something that they could then bring to their professional practice, to their own professional growth plan meetings, and to continue to support their learning. So that was my thinking. Here's the process. If they, for the weeks that they choose to focus on the ePortfolio, so it's not every week, and you'll understand why shortly. They choose their topic, and they have to complete all of the readings. I don't know about y'all, but if y'all have strategies on getting folks to do the readings, I would like to have them. There's 3 readings, and they're required to show evidence and refer to all 3 of those pieces in their ePortfolio artifact. Each Each weekly topic then has an accompanying learning activity, and that's the thinking routine. So what I'm using is Harvard University's Project Zero thinking routines. If you Google that, it will bring you to a page that has a bazillion and one different things. They are geared towards a K to 12 context, but I'm modifying them obviously for an adult learning environment. So they do the readings, they complete the activity, then they do the critical reflection. So it's a high load, which is why you'll see I started off with 6 the first round with Trevor. Then last year I did 5, and now this year I think I'm going to do 4, because the feedback is it's really valuable, but a lot of work. And then the critical reflection, I give them a list of a wide variety of prompts. Part of it is tracking what they did. It's a metacognitive exercise. So how did you engage with the material? What was completing the activity like for you? But the piece that students really struggle with in the beginning, but they usually land the plane by the end, is I'm trying to get them to question assumptions, like to identify and question assumptions in our own teaching practice. So they might say things like, I'll use the week about social networks, because that's my area, and they'll say, I never really thought about how the people I'm connected to shape the way I'm actually carrying out my work. And we have a whole conversation with that, and then I'll say, well, like, why do you think that wasn't something you thought about? Or why is it so difficult to think about the interdependent nature of the work? So it's not, I'm trying to get them to push past the analytical and into the critical, and to see the critical space as a fertile ground for learning, not negative judgment. So the first half of the course is convincing them that that's what we're really doing, and helping push them from, most folks start in the descriptive. So I get them from the descriptive, then we move to the analytical, and then the last half of the course is moving them from the analytical to the critical, and literally convincing them that, like, critical reflection is not, my questions are not meant to be judgmental, but rather helping us walk that learning edge. So that's the sort of broad strokes overview of the Minds on ePortfolio. And there's the link if you didn't get it from the chat. And now Trevor can tell you how that was my plan. Trevor can tell you how it really happened.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I love the little overview too, because it was reminding me of what the experience was like, even though I was thinking about it myself, but I was just like, oh yeah, that is kind of how it rolled out. All right, so hopefully people can hear me better now. Yes. All right, I'm hardwired in. I'm back up in my office. We're in a big concrete building, and the Wi-Fi connection is less than to be desired. So I'll just pick up one where I guess I left off in my introduction, that to give you a bit of context too. So I'm here on Fogo Island now. It's actually 7 years out here. I've actually been an administrator here for 3 years. Started as a teacher, and I actually jumped from being in the classroom right to the principal's role. So that was a big step for myself. A lot of learning happened in a short period of time. But I actually started my career in Makovic, Labrador, in an Inuit community of 365 people, which again, I will say really gave me the perspective. It really allowed me to question a lot I knew about Indigenous culture. So I was reflecting on that as we were talking about our land acknowledgement. I spent 1 year on the West Coast too, prior to ending up here. And then having grown up on the Avalon, I have been in every region of this province in one way or another. So that is my context. I'm seeing some folks here who have some connections to Fogo Island, and I'm convinced it's the center of the universe at this point in time, because now everywhere I go, there's some connection to Fogo Island. So to speak about this, and actually as a nice kind of a segue, the piece there about the coming into a grad course, and even what the reason why I was in the master's program to begin with, and this won't be news to Joelle because we've talked extensively about this, but I was the student who was the good student. Um, I was the one who came into my classes saying, "What's that expectation? What paper do I need to write? How many references do I need? How many words does it need to be?" And I will crank it out for you every time. Just tell me what it is that I need to do. And through this process and actually engaging in this kind of work, this was my realization that this kind of an assessment, this kind of an experience allowed me to become a better learner and not just a good student. I was very good, and I suppose I still am very good at checking boxes in the sense that I will get it done. If what it is that you want me to do is crank out those 2 or 3 essays, those papers, I'll get it done, and I'll have everything that you need in there, and hopefully the proper formatting. Although Joelle has actually barred me from ever using the italics function ever again. That's another story. But this work actually really required me to be, and I'm borrowing a phrase from Georgina Lake is actually where I picked up the learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but it must have come from somewhere else maybe. Um, because in the very beginning of all of this, and even if you look at my portfolio, and actually there's a QR code up there, I hope it actually works in the sense that you'd be able to scan it and actually get to that ePortfolio that I created as part of this course. It does. Excellent. Um, uh, the the process of it was I wanted to know what it was that Joelle wanted. That was where I started. It was, what is it that Dr. Rodway wants from me that I can crank this out and I get the 85 or 90 that I want? And I quickly realized that that wasn't going to happen because that wasn't the purpose of what this assessment was. So even if you look at my ePortfolio, my very first one, my very first artifact, and there's some examples of it there later on, is very different from my from where it went. So that journey that Joelle is describing 100% happened to me. That I started with, okay, I'm going to come in there with my what I usually know. I'm going to describe the readings. I'm going to put in my citations. I'm going to question some things, but applying it to my practice was something that, having me question my assumptions, wasn't something that prior to this course, and I have to say this, I almost got to the end of my graduate program with ever engaging in this kind of work. Um, and originally, I was part of the course route. So I was just going to complete my 10 courses, put my application in, walk out the door, and get my bump in pay. That was honestly the reason why I started this. So fighting that urge to just do what it was that somebody wanted me to do was huge here. And I have to say that it was really the design of the course in providing the gathering space for us to come together and meet face to face. For me to be able to see Dr. Rodway's face and engaging in real conversations with her about my work. And there were, I think, a few emails back and forth exchanges, I think. Not so much, I think more so later on. When you took me on as and you were my supervisor, but it really started here. And I will say, if this is the kind of work that you want to engage in, I do think it is meaningful and authentic work. That space in your classroom and in the online space that Dr. Rodway created, that's vital to making this work because the conversations need to happen, and you need to be able to feel safe enough to be able to take those risks and have those relationships with your colleagues, with your peers, the other students in the class, as well as your professor, because no one wants to put them out the vulnerability out there to get nothing back or to take that risk and then not have, I guess, some reward in the end. So the biggest piece of this is that exactly what Joelle was talking about, and that this connected the actual theory to my practice. And there's an example I'm going to bring up later on, where this actually fundamentally changed what we were doing here at the school, because it was through this work that I recognized that there was a problem, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was that feeling that you get that, you know what, there's something not quite right working, but I don't know where it is. And I will say that this, oh, thanks, Joel. That piece there, the fundamental shift, I this kind of work changed what I thought the purpose of my graduate program was. That I wanted it, and I recognized that I wanted it to be more meaningful for me and connected to my practice. And this actually, I changed. I changed from doing the course route, just checking the boxes, to something that was I don't want to say the word is arduous, but much more in depth and involved. But it was something that I was passionate about, and it gave me the opportunity to be creative and express my passions. And just like Joelle said, I've now used this as an example for folks when they ask me, like, hey, what kind of a leader are you? This is what I direct them to. The what I've created here. One last point, though, before I move into the other slides. Exactly where, and Joelle kind of already referred to this, the changing up. This was very heavy. I'm very grateful that I actually did this course during the summer semester. I think it was summer. Yes, yeah, had to be because it was work was kind of not as intense as it would be now. And oh, and at the time too, I was actually finishing. I was actually got the administrator's job going into September when I was finishing this course. So this was a very nice lead in into the project route how I ended my degree. So yeah, we'll move ahead there, Joel. Just to kind of elaborate on some of these points. Um, so the actual portfolio itself, I agree. It creates this collection of work that you can go back and you can refer to. And even for myself, I've now gone back to this a few times around. And when I'm because if there's any administrators or anybody who's been in an administrative position, that you know that sometimes you need to affirm your thinking, you need to pick yourself back up, and coming back and reading these reflections really grounded me in what my beliefs and my values were, where my thinking was. The only thing that I would say about the actual tool itself, and this is probably less a criticism of the concept and more of the actual platform that was used. The ePortfolio tool that was in its current state. And Joe, help me out here. It is the ePortfolio. This is its own thing that Memorial University provides, is it?
No, it's a tool, I think, and Pam Phillips who's here actually could help us out with that. It's an actual platform that exists outside, but Memorial subscribes to. So it is the ePortfolio tool that Memorial has available to instructors for use in their classes.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Thanks so much. Because I will say, for me personally, I'm a bit tech savvy. I like getting into things, going down into the weeds, and figuring out how can I make this picture be right here? How can I change the color so they pop more? How can I make sure my menus? And there's an example there on the screen of how I organized it. Um, that's kind of the thing that I like to do. I know for some other folks, this was, and I will say even for me, getting in there and recognizing and realizing how to do all of this, it took a great deal of time. Um, Not to mention the work of the readings and the reflecting and the creating piece, but a lot of time and effort went into making sure that this was organized in the front. So probably providing that opportunity for your students ahead of time and even a chance to be able to share with each other to say, hey, this is what I did to make this work. Can we sit down for 10, 15, 20 minutes? Probably an hour for this tool to figure this out. Would definitely help the process. Something that students are familiar with. But generally speaking, I really like to be able to create this online blog. It kind of got me away from the papers and the strict APA style. Even though I'll reference it now in my next slide, that can still be done in this space if that's something that you like to see your students still demonstrate. We can move ahead there. Thank you. There we go. So one big thing that I really liked about it is that, and I'm big on the universal design for learning, making sure we have equitable and accessible learning spaces and learning opportunities for students. So this really provided myself and Joelle to really go outside of that and be able to provide those tools, provide those opportunities to anybody who is interacting with the portfolio. So including links, videos, images, different formatting in terms of the text styles. All of that was incorporated in this, which is something that typically was never really available if I was just writing the paper that I was required to do it 2 or 3 times in run of a semester. So I particularly like that because I am the kind of person who wants to incorporate these things and be able to demonstrate and express my learning in various ways rather just through text. So, and there's an example there. This is the way that I organized my portfolios themselves. I always started with an introduction, just a hey, hey, you're reading this. This is just, I wanted to talk to my audience. I wanted to engage with them. I'd usually put a link to something that I've created. And that was all through Google Apps for Education. It was really easy for me to integrate that. I started with a general reflection because I felt I still was grounded in the I need to describe what it is I'm talking about before I go anywhere else, and then I would work my way to the critical reflection. And that was just something for me that I recognized that I needed to do to be able to get to the critical reflection. I needed to write it before I could really dive in and get down into the weeds and really think, okay, well, how is this really going to affect me and my practice? How am I going to change now because I've got this knowledge? And I will say, prior to this course, that wasn't something that I ever really did. I mean, it was always there in the back of my mind, but this made it intentional and it made it purposeful. Okay, so we can move on to the next one there, Joelle. So I picked this one because I always use this example as I didn't need to do this. This was not required. If I remember this one correctly, Joelle, and jump in if I'm misremembering things, because we know what memory is like. This was the map of our social networks, and I remember. I think the brief was that we had to create one. I think that's what it was. It was just one. Yeah, I'm seeing some nodding. Yeah.
I'm trying to find my mouse isn't working. So it was the idea was you would just map your own egocentric, like your own professional learning map, but you did
Oh,
this, which was
yes.
awesome. But
Well, but this is what this process allowed me to do is because so I created one that was about scheduling within the school, our program for 10, 11, and 12, and I was very satisfied with that. Hit the mark, life was good. But then it actually got me thinking. I said, well, listen, like that gut feeling of, you know what, I don't. I know that there's issues in terms of communication. I know that there's a disconnect between some staff members here. Why is that? And is it grounded somewhere in this? So this was this unprompted, and just because I was now interested and now I was curious about, you know what if I took our formal collaborative connections in the school and mapped them. And what you're looking at here is exactly that. This was connected to one of the ePortfolio, the artifacts we had to create. But this, and even if you look at it, you can see it plain as day. And I use this as an example frequently. And now I even engage teachers with this exercise as well, because this demonstrated and it allowed me to explain to people, you know what? I have a whole group of staff there in the top right hand corner, if you can see them there, who are only connected formally to the other members in the school by one person. And Joel used to always say, you always try to find yourself when you start doing these maps. And I'll spoiler alert, I was that one person that they were connected to, because the high school teachers would and that's that team that's over there would frequently talk about how disconnected they felt from everybody else in the school. Um, and this was a way that formalized it for me. It's like, hey, yeah, they are. I'm in this brokering position, and then what does that mean for me? Well, for one, it means that if my relationship is not very strong those particular teachers, they are now completely removed from the rest of the folks in the school. So this not only was this unprompted, not only was this just because I was curious now and I was like, I need to know. This actually completely changed how we organized our teams here in the school. That we now have connections between all of our members of our service delivery team with that team that at that one point in time was completely disconnected. Um, so it and I think Joel would be happy to know this is exactly what the purpose of the project was. It was taking what it was in the theory, it was applying it to and analyzing it through my own experiences and my own practice, and then making the changes. So this activity changed what was happening here at Fogle and Central Academy, and it would never have happened if I wasn't put in a position where I could do this, and I couldn't express my creativity and risk taking, and well, become a better learner. I think there's one more slide there, I think, is it? Because this is, I guess, now where we're going with this, or where it went. There we go. So that was how it all started. I'm trying to use the meme world here, but I feel like I'm slowly getting away from I feel old, but where it went. So this meant from this work, I recognized that, hey, you know what? I don't want to just crank out papers anymore. I don't want to finish the course route. It's not meaningful for me. I'm not engaged with the work. This was work, but I was passionate about it. And I switched. I approached Joelle and was like, "Hey, could you supervise a project?" Actually, but really, Joelle, I think you reached out to me. I believe you after seeing some of this. I believe the question to me was, "Why are you doing the course route?"
I ask all my students, why are you doing the course route? I think the opportunity to direct your own learning is the best space. But I did, because I could see the growth, and you
Mhm.
took me up on it. So that was
That's right.
nice.
I appreciate every minute that you spent with me, and every minute in the future, guaranteed. So yeah, this is where this went. Now I'm particularly, and it's funny because I'm much more proud of the project than I am of the paper, and I do not, and I'm not ashamed at all to admit it. Uh, that project has got me further as a professional than any paper I've ever written. I've used that as part of my own portfolio when I apply for applications. I send it to people when they want to know what it is that my thinking and what my style is. And even we took another even greater risk with the paper. In actual fact, a whole section was basically say, "Hey, stop reading this paper now and go over and experience what it was that was created." Because essentially, I took this idea of the critical self reflection, creating artifacts, and I turned it into a whole website, whole project that brought me through school improvement, what it meant for learning for me, and what it meant for leadership for me. And I used a thing called ThingLink. So there is a creative component to this. It's not all there, but again, if you've got your QR code scanner there, you can scan that, and it should bring you right to the site. Um, uh, by all means, go ahead and do it. I mean, that site was actually created so people could um, uh, be able to actually contribute and then reflect with me at the time. That was what I really wanted. I don't know if anyone's taken me up on it at this point in time, but it is there. So I would encourage you, if you've got the time, if you want to help me reflect together. But the same thing, I go back to the ePortfolio and I read that to affirm what it is that I believe in, or what my beliefs are grounded in. And I've gone back to this as well because that project actually allowed me to record, oh, how many recordings, Joel? 20 something, I think, recordings of how I was taking.
I had to cut you off.
Yes, you did. You had to stop me. Of what it was that I was reading, how it was grounded within my experience as an educator and as an administrator in a rural school, and how that was going to affect me moving forward. And it's very meaningful for me now to go back and look at that and then say, okay, well, if I ask that question of myself now, what would I say? Um, so yeah, that's the short and long of it for me. That's been my experience with it. I'll stick around for questions. I will let you know that our recess is coming up, and recess gets a busy time in a K to 12 school. So I will stick around for as long as I possibly can.
Recess time. I started building a recess time into my own schedule.
Everybody
Um,
needs one.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Trevor. I will say that an unintended outcome of the Minds on ePortfolio is the last couple of like since the thing Trevor didn't tell you, by the way, was I did this in this first summer of the pandemic. So clearly I had workload calculation issues. These poor teachers who were doing the pandemic, although the feedback was positive throughout. And what the result of this has been is every time I offer the ePortfolio, I have probably somewhere upwards of 4 to 5 students per class coming and asking me to supervise a project. It sort of for the ones that really grab onto it, they want to move into continuing and doing something in the project space. So the changes that I've made, one is I now have said use whatever tool you like. So a lot of these folks are, if they're teaching in a school district that uses predominantly Apple tools, they'll use some sort of Mac version of something. If the NLESD folks use Google stuff, some folks will use the ePortfolios, although Pam, I mean, I've been very forthcoming with the CITL folk. Nobody likes it. It's based in WordPress. It's got a lot, it's fancier than it needs to be. And for some folks who really struggle, I've just taken the technology component out of it altogether, and they do like a linked PDF kind of thing. I started off with 6 with Pam, or sorry, with Trevor's year. Then I went down to 5. I'm getting ready to do it again. I'm going to knock it down to 4. In addition to bringing it down to 4, I've taken out some of the other learning components in the course, namely the sharing our learning discussion board, because universally, regardless of what course I'm teaching, no matter how much I try to experiment and play with generating discussion in a discussion board, the feedback is universally they hate them. They go in, they post, they look for something to respond to, they do it, they check the box, they move on. So I've eliminated that to free up more time for thinking and reflection. And then the last piece, and then we'll just open it up to discussion. So like literally, well, here's my reading list. I'm revising my reading list. I revise it every time. And behind me on the couch, because I'm at home, it's my folder. I'm thinking about this right now as Sunday course release comes up, is how can I incorporate more peer feedback? So like if you look at, so I do social networks is one of my areas of expertise. So I'm thinking about if I were to map my class as a social network in this space, it's very hub and spoke. All roads lead to Joelle. And it was very rewarding, very gratifying, all of the things, including time intensive. So I'm trying to reduce the burden on me, but as importantly, and probably more importantly, I want to build that community with them. So I was trying to do that in the sharing the learning. That didn't work so much. I experimented with learning groups, breaking my online classes into smaller learning groups in another course. That worked pretty well. So I'm going to bring this one in. So instead of having the discussion board, that community building and discussion about the readings will happen in groups based around which reading bundle. So I also used to make them read everything. Like there's 32 readings on my course list, and then with the expectation to add in, I've now stopped that. So I have bookended it with sections that are required, but the middle section is like choose your own adventure. The activities I used to couple with the readings. Now I'm grouping them and also making that. And this is my continued learning and experimentation with UDL. So we'll see how that goes. And then of course the grading. If you go into the folder that I linked there, you'll see the rubric that I use. I use a feedback focused classroom that takes people some getting used to as well, because even teachers are married to grades. So that took a lot. And I would just satisfy those people by saying, well, if I were to give this a grade today, this is what I would put on it. But I'm thinking about contract grading for those of you who are playing around in the ungrading space, where the level of feedback and the number of things you do, like sort of getting all of that, all that stuff out of the way at the beginning of the course to free up their energy to do what Trevor did. And Catherine, I will put that up there in 1 second, or Pam, if you're able to copy and paste that in there for me, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, because just to jump there for a second, Joelle, I went from a place of what is it that Joelle wants to what does it need to be for me,
That's right.
and that's huge. And I use that now with my teachers, the teachers I work with, and with the students I work with. Is it what it needs to be?
And that's a real paradigm shift. And that's it for the educators in my classes. I mean, usually these folks, the scattered one will be fairly early career, but most of them were like Trevor, you know, getting close to 10 years, like they're around, like in the 5 to 10 year mark. The policy context in Newfoundland and Labrador really drives home enrollment in our graduate programs, because when he's talking about a pay raise, like we're talking about a $10,000 a year pay raise, not something smaller than that. I think that's what it works out to be. It's significant, whatever the number is. So there's that. I just want to put the copy to the Dropbox link. If you could copy, I put it right at the beginning of the chat. Yes, thank you, Tulane. So I just want to open it up to questions for me or Trevor, or thinking and how we could improve on this. Taylor is not, or Taylor, that's one of my other students. Trevor is not the only person who has come back to me, but because my students are teachers, it's hard to pull them all in. So he's a principal and he's in Newfoundland. I was like, Trevor should be able to come. Could the ePortfolio be used to house technical? That's a Pam question. I think you could put anything in there. Like, it's really like broad. Because the way most students, what most students were doing was then linking outwards to things, right? So you put the content in the portfolio, and then if you need to go elsewhere, as long as you can link, I think, Caroline, that's the piece. Like, can you link to go out of it? But the ePortfolio tool itself, if anybody works with websites, it's WordPress.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I ended up doing. Basically, I would be in there tinkering around. If I created something that was, hey, I really can't figure this out, I would literally just go and create the link in Google Drive, because that's the apps that I would be using, and then just link it right into the portfolio. It would bring up another window, but it wouldn't, but it would be embedded in what it was that you were doing.
The biggest advantage, I think, is making learning visible. I don't know that we always do that very well. And I don't know that we always do that very well in a faculty of education training teachers. You know, this is because it's the same conversation that we are all having with each other in the different sessions we've been in. It's time constraints, it's resource constraints, it's reproduction of what we know, of what we've experienced. It's all of those things. But what I really like about it is it has allowed me, I've been more mindful about my teaching practice than I've ever been in my 20 years of teaching in the design of this. And I'm now bringing these elements into other courses, not necessarily the portfolio, because I don't want to be known as the portfolio professor and then everybody like runs in droves away from me. I'm sure my face was on more than a few dartboards at times, especially with Trevor's group, because I was learning too. But not with you, but I'm not convinced that that's not true with others. But I think the thing that Trevor said too that was really important was, right at the onset, I told them, I can only learn, like, I'm here to learn. I know a lot about this one little area, like school improvement processes, but my learning in this space is to learn from you in terms of how to better support your learning. So I showed up. I use a lot of video. So like if I'm putting an announcement, I don't always write it up. I just flick my camera on and I could look like something shot out of a cannon one day, or I could look like something that's, you know, I've come from a meeting. And I do that on purpose because students don't want to go on camera because they're like, oh, I look bad. Oh,
Mhm.
I do this, I do that. So like sometimes I'm wearing a hoodie, sometimes I'm wearing business clothes, like
And it was
wherever
that
I
that
am.
really allowed even me, because I know in the very beginning of the course too, it was however way you want to tell me where you're starting from, do it. And that was where the ThingLink came from. And that's how I really got into that. It was me just recording my voice, and that was
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Um,
I
but I,
give feedback using like the video or the audio tools lots of times, or sometimes I'll go in and I'll go into their website and I'll put it into, I can't remember what it's called now, whatever the embedded tool is, Bongo, you know, like in um in Brightspace, and I'll record myself as I'm going through, and I'll just like highlight. I'll turn the highlighter thing on, and I'll give the feed. It's faster for me to do it that way than to write everything out. And then I have the rubric where, but I'm going to turn that more into a checklist, even though it's funny because like you try to get students away from having a checklist mode, but sometimes checklists are helpful, like for some of the basic things. But for me right now, it's the peer feedback. And I was talking about this with Trevor the other day, is I'm like, the level of, Trevor used the word vulnerability, which I think is true. And especially, and you know who it is? It's the high achieving ones, the ones who are like the gold star chasers that are the most afraid to share their learning with others, I find in my experience.
She's talking about
And
me.
kind of, but
That is 100%. But I just want to reiterate your point. It's exactly what it
right,
was, and
yeah.
that's what was always the focus for me. And this really broke me away from that.
Well, I always talk about that. You know, I usually, when I introduce myself, it's like, listen, I can do school. I have like 25 years of formal education. Um, I can play the game. If that's what you want, you can play the game. And they can do that here too, if that's what they want. But then there's also this space. And I find a lot of folks, many of the students in the class are craving this kind of learning. They've just never experienced it.
Mm.
So that's what I'm doing, for better or for worse. Yeah, that's totally it, Anne. Like, and they hate that. Trevor, I laughed when I saw that in your slide this morning. Trevor said the something about like reducing the need for an exemplar.
Mm.
Like everybody wants to see. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to see. Like what do you want? And they want to replicate. And I'm like, and they find that very hard. Um, So I work with them. I do show them. So if you were in my website now, I think it might even be Trevor. Trevor always says yes to me, but you know, I cruise through a portfolio and I show them, but I say, but this is what Trevor did. Like, you don't have to do that. Like, you don't
Mm.
have to do these things. You don't have to, I mean, some people's network maps are the way I probably would have done it with, and what I tell them to do, show up with some colored markers and some blank paper. That's all you need. And then just take a picture of it and upload the picture of it. And that's fine too. So it's got the UDL going on in there. I'm doing the feedback focus. It's got lots of things, but I got to tell you that when you read, I mean, I was prepared because Trevor and I still keep in touch and talk a lot. But the first time Trevor wrote anything to me about this, I sat and cried in my house because I was like, oh, there was value in the work. And when you teach online, you don't know. Like, I mean, like, it's like you guys know this now. That's the bonus of the pandemic. There's
Mm.
this distance and you don't know. Like, I don't know. If you don't tell me, I don't know. And there was value in the work. And it's what keeps me going. And yes, it's hard. And yes, it's all the things. And I hate the ePortfolio tool as much as anybody else does. I love CITL. I mean, like, they are the people. If you're
Uh,
stuck, call them. I mean,
I hate to cut you off. I do have to go. I'm just going to quickly pop my email in the chat if anybody has any questions that they want to ask me after. But thanks so much for inviting me, and
thanks so much for coming, Trevor.
oh, I
And
appreciate it.
thanks, Trevor, for coming. And it was certainly nice to hear a student's point of view and how you incorporated the coursework into your everyday work life. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right, take care, folks. Enjoy the rest of your days.
So, I mean, I'm just going to end it there. I mean, as an educator, I just feel like that's enough for me. I mean, that was way more than I ever expected um, was going to happen. Um,
So
but
thanks, Joelle, too, for
mm,
your thoughts and sharing your experiences with us today. It was certainly rewarding to hear what's happening in your classroom. And as you said, an online environment, you wouldn't know if they didn't tell you, right?
yeah.
And all of the things that you talked about, connecting with your students by doing videos of yourself, and certainly helps get them to feel comfortable. It helps create that uncomfortable environment for them to chat, to engage in such projects as this. So again, we'll end there. We still got 4 minutes if people want to stay on and have some questions. But thanks to everybody for attending the session. A recording of the session will be available after the conference on CITL's YouTube channel. So enjoy the remainder of the conference.
And thanks to you, Pam, and to Malayan for your support today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Wishing it was Friday.
Yeah, I'm trying to teach myself what weekends are for, you know.
Yeah.
I can't. You're Peggy, you need
Peggy,
to unmute yourself.
So,
I said I have one friend that sends celebratory messages every Thursday for Friday Eve.
Oh, Friday Eve. That's funny.
That's good.
Thank you both,
I love it.
and Timothy and Pam for your help. The session was fantastic. So, thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
Thank you, Peggy.
Still haven't gotten up to Fogo. Every summer I tell Trevor I'm going to come up, and I haven't made it up there yet.
I was amazed. We arrived on the island last week, and I didn't realize it was last summer, and it was private. And the trans show was happening at the Lions Club. The community parade happened down through Fogo. Everybody was out with their rainbow. There was I didn't see as many rainbows in St. John's as I saw in the harbor of Fogo. It was going on in different parts of the island. It was great to see the community involvement. So he's doing some fantastic work, and it's a great school. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's pretty
Good.
amazing.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
It
was so funny though, man. He was like, yeah, it's funny. That's what I loved about the portfolio. He was really frustrated with me in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, some of those detail oriented would be and they want direction, but that shift in learning, I can appreciate that. I had a course in my master's program, and I went to the prof half partway through it and said, "There's something got to work out here." And then they said, "But you're doing okay, blah blah blah." I said, "I don't care that I'm only getting 75 in these papers. It's taken me way too long, and I'm not getting the marks for the work. So how do I do these better?" Right?
Yeah.
So,
No, and Joelle, it was great to see how the ePortfolio helped. Yeah, and the tool, yes, there is, we can experiment with tools, and that's what you end up doing, I find, from my teaching and also with working with faculty, is we start out with one tool and with something that we can be comfortable with, and then students start sharing other tools. So that's a great thing.
Some people are fine with it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And like some people are fine with it. It just depends on what their background is.
Yeah. And if you've got some tools, we certainly like for you to share them with us too. Send us a list and we'll start evaluating some of them and adding them to our learning technology system that we have for faculty that we share with faculty.
Yeah. We just released it last week. Finally, the Learning
Yeah.
Technology Index that we've kind of done some reviews, and we'll indicate which ones we support and which ones we'll consider but give faculty some resource feedback on the tools that we are aware of.
Yeah, and it was in beta, it's been around for a year or two, but it's now fully launched. So it'd be nice to hear what some of the tools you've been using or your students have been using.
Yeah, they like Google, I gotta say.
Yeah.
It's just easier.
Yes, and I find with using WordPress site and other tools is they want to make it, because the capability is there to make it look really, really good. They spend so much time learning how to make it good. Yeah, because it can give you have lots of more, and if you want to make it even better looking, and you could spend lots of time doing that. Right. And we talked about that when you used a tool in that, this can be very plain, can just have text and a couple images, but people are going to want to do more with it. Right.
It's also, my informal observation, it's generational.
Yes.
And it's around like how much exposure and use of technology these folks have in their day-to-day life too. Like some of them get into ePortfolio but they're building websites of their own and they don't have any trouble with it at all. But I had one woman, I was just like, just do it in a Word document. That's fine. Like it was
Yeah, that's
stressing her
right.
out. And I'm like, well, that's totally counterproductive to what our learning goals are here. So just don't worry about it. Wait.
That's right. Yep. It's good. And that's what keeps it flexible and meets being learner centered.